We appreciate all of the guests who have appeared on our show and sincerely thank them for providing you, our audience, with useful information. However, the advice our guests provide is theirs, and we encourage you to seek out a professional if you have specific questions about any topic we cover on the Crushing Debt Podcast. On this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast, the Land Geek.
Welcome to the Crushing Debt Podcast with your host, Florida attorney Sean Yesner, where our goal is to help you get rid of the financial bullies in your life.
So welcome back to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast. My name is Sean Yesner, owner and founder of Yesner Law, and I have a great guest for you this week. Before I get to my guest, though, real quick, I do want to talk about our longtime sponsor of the Crushing Debt Podcast. You all know him as Sam Cohen, the owner of Attorneys First Insurance, and what he does is he writes liability insurance, errors and omissions insurance, professional liability insurance, basically malpractice insurance for attorneys and title companies all over the country. Now, he has a focus on Florida and Texas, but he can write malpractice insurance or E&O coverage anywhere in the country. So a great way to support the show would be to support Sam, and a great way to support Sam would be to introduce him to an attorney or title company that you know that's looking to renew their malpractice coverage. But I wanted to get to my guest this week. He is known as the Land Geek. He's widely considered to be the country's most trusted and foremost authority on buying and selling raw, undeveloped land. Today, he will share his journey into the world of buying, selling, and leasing raw land as an investment. He's actively invested in real estate and raw land for almost 20 years and has completed over 5,000 unique transactions in that time. Please welcome my guest, Mark Podolsky. Welcome, Mark.
Sean Yesner, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So, one of my first introductions to real estate, I remember being, I must have been somewhere between 10 and 12 years old, somewhere in that time frame. And I grew up in Miami. And so I remember driving out to this dirt lot in the middle of nowhere. And I was there with my mom and my dad and my grandfather. And my grandfather said, "This is the land I just invested in." And I'm looking around. I mean, there was no construction. There were no houses going up. It was just grass and rocks and dirt. And I thought, why the heck would Grandpa ever invest in dirt and rocks and grass? And now my grandfather, my mother's father, the one that had bought this property, passed when he was 15, when I was 15. Not when It would be hard to be my grandpa if he passed when he was 15. He passed when I was 15. And I think at the time, a couple of years later, I said to my mom, "Hey, whatever happened to that piece of land that Grandpa had that he showed us?" And her comment was something like he either sold it before he died or sold it as part of the probate or whatever. But it always sort of stuck with me. Why would somebody want to invest, other than maybe we're going to put a house on it later? Why would somebody want to invest in a piece of dirt?
Well, I mean, if you really look at all the real estate segments, there's one thing that dirt has that actually everything in life doesn't. Everything in your life. But dirt has this one unique attribute. You know what it is?
It's unique. It's that piece of dirt is that piece of dirt. I can't find another piece of dirt that's like that particular piece of dirt.
That's true. It's one of one. However, it's the only thing that lasts. It's the only thing that lasts.
Okay.
So everything in our lives is going to go away. So, we talk about like a legacy investment. Land lasts forever. And so there's nothing to maintain, nothing to protect, nothing to destroy. And from a business aspect, and we'll kind of talk about how I run this business, there's no physical inventory. And then when you make it cash flow the way I make it cash flow, it's really special. So, Sean, if you want, I can kind of walk you through my model. We can kind of go from there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So you're in Florida.
Correct.
And I'm going to assume that you own 5 acres of raw land in where I live in Arizona, and you owe $200 in back taxes. So, Sean, you're advertising 2 important things to me. Number one, you have no emotional attachment to that raw land. You're in Florida with the Gators. Your land is in the desert, right? But number 2, you're distressed financially in some weird way. Because when we don't pay for things like, our property taxes, We don't value them in the same way. As a result, the county treasurer keeps sending you notices saying, Sean, if you don't pay your property taxes, you're going to lose that property to a tax deed or a tax lien investor. So all I'm going to do, or actually all your audience is going to do, is going to look at the comparable sales on your 5-acre parcel. Let's say for the last 12 to 18 months. They're going to find the lowest comparable sale, and they're going to divide by 4. And that's going to get me what Warren Buffett would call a 300% margin of safety. So now we're going to send you an actual offer on your property. So let's just use some easy numbers. Let's say that the lowest comparable sale is $10,000. We're going to send you an offer of $2,500. Now for you, you accept it. Why? Because for you, $2,500 is better than nothing. In reality, 3 to 5% of people are going to accept our quote unquote top dollar offer. But now that you've accepted it, we all have to do due diligence. So we have to confirm you still own the property. We have to confirm back taxes are only $200. We have to make sure there's been no breaks in the chain of title. We have to make sure there's no liens or encumbrances. So I have this whole checklist, and I have that outsourced to my team in the Philippines. We pay about $11 for it. They're connected to an American title company. Now, if it's $5,000 or more, we're not going to take any risk. We'll close conventionally through an American title company.
Right.
But everything checks out, and we then send you a check for $2,300. We send the treasurer a check for $200. We own this property free and clear, and now we're going to sell it 30 days or less because, Sean, we have a built-in best buyer. Do you know who it is?
Probably some other investor that would want to do something with it, build something on it.
That's a good guess. It's the neighbors, So we're going to send out neighbor letters saying, hey, here's your opportunity. Protect your privacy, protect your views, know your neighbor. Oftentimes the neighbors will buy it. Now, if they pass, we'll go to our buyers list. If our buyers list passes, we'll go to a little website you may have never heard of. It's called Craigslist. It's the 15th most trafficked website in the United States. We'll go to one I know you've heard of called Meta or Facebook, buy, sell groups, the marketplace. And then we're going to go to the lands, landmodo.com, landandfarm.com, landsofamerica.com, landflip.com, landhub.com. These are platforms where people buy and sell raw land. But the way that we're going to sell it is the secret. So all we're going to ask for now is a $2,500 down payment. And then we're going to make it a car payment. Let's say $297 a month at 9% interest for the next 84 months. So now I couldn't go 6 to 10 months out, but it's a one-time sale. We're going to get our money out as fast as possible. And then we have $297 a month coming for the next 84 months. Sean, no renters, no rehabs, no renovations, no rodents. And because we're not dealing with a tenant, we're exempt from Dodd-Frank, RESPA, and the SAFE Act, all this onerous real estate legislation. So it's a simple game we play. Can we create enough of these land notes where our passive income exceeds our fixed expenses? And now we're working because we want to, not because we have to.
So what if somebody came to you and said, well, that's great and all, but you're selling it to me, you picked it up for whatever you picked it up for, you agree to sell it to me for 10 grand. Here's a check. Here's 10 grand. I want it.
Yeah, unfortunately, we'll have to take that 10 grand, Sean, and redeploy it in more land.
Okay.
It's not ideal, but it happens, but sure.
Okay, so where I thought you were going, which maybe you still would go there in certain circumstances, but one of the places I thought you might be going was to buy the tax certificates and the tax liens themselves. And then that way, if this property's worth 10 grand and you can pick it up for the 200 of unpaid property taxes, and then you can do the same thing, 2,500 down and a note over X period of time for X number of payments. But it doesn't sound like you do a lot of that, or is that another piece to the model?
Well, let's say that we go to a tax deed auction where we can just get the deed. Well, now it's a competitive situation where they're going to be literally a bunch of investors in the room like me, and maybe I'll get it 85 cents on the dollar. So that's not great. I'd rather get it before it goes to auction. Now, if it's a tax lien state, tax liens are great if you want to make 16 to 24%. That being said, I don't want to make 16 to 24%. I want to make 300 to 1,000% on money. And the way I can do that is get it before it goes to the tax lien auction.
So what about, I guess the neighbors would still be a good buyer in a situation. So I keep envisioning sort of what my grandfather had. And it was literally land as far as the eye could see. And he had, a little square of it, whatever, an acre, half an acre, however, I don't even remember how big it was. But I guess then the appeal is still to the neighbors to say, hey, you can buy this land, combine it with your land next door, and then when you're ready, you build that huge mega mansion house. Is that sort of the argument? Is that the pitch?
I mean, you could. Yeah, I mean, this is rural land typically. People aren't really going to be ready to build out there yet. We're looking at land 2 to 3 hours from the nearest city.
Wow. So then what's the incentive to buy, as the end buyer, to buy the land?
Right.
I mean,
right.
I know
so
you
Sean,
said...
Yeah, so you and I are not the target market.
Right.
Right. We live in big cities, but there are people that like the idea of owning land that has no restrictions. There are people that don't like people. There's people that like to hunt, fish. They like to create a homestead. And there's others, just people that have a legacy investment, just like your grandfather. They want to just hold it and see if it develops one day.
Yeah. Okay. So I do want to give out your contact information real quick. If you want to connect with Mark, it is Mark, M-A-R-K, at thelandgeek.com, or the website is thelandgeek.com. And then the Land Geek is LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, social media. If you want to connect with Mark, it's the Land Geek. Plus, you've got a book, Dirt Rich, How One Ambitiously Lazy Geek Created Passive Income to Real Estate Without Renters, Renovations, and Rehabs. And I think you just went through the system on how that happened. So I think that I would assume the book then deep dives into a lot of those topics.
Correct.
And it's available anywhere, everywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's on Amazon and all the fine bookstores, but mainly Amazon.
Right. One question I had, we talk a lot. So I do a lot of real estate law here in Florida and Tampa and all over Florida. And houses, real estate has sort of become what I liken to the wild, wild west. We're still getting multiple offers when a house goes on the market. It's on the market for a very short period of time. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of cash buyers. There's a lot of different kinds of creative financing going on. Do you see the same demand, the same craziness per se in vacant land?
I do, because land is an inflation hedge. So in this market, we literally can't keep anything in stock. It's kind of crazy.
Wow. So how do you find the properties? Is it you're looking at tax records? You're looking at land records?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's all public information. We could cheat and we go to a website called datatree.com or listsource.com that will have all the records. And then we'll scrub out all the, let's say, residential houses or industrial property, commercial property. We could sort it by a use code for VL, by vacant land. But okay. DataTree will do all this for you. And then we'll use software to take that list. We'll upload it into our software and send out offers.
Okay. So what are some other reasons? We all talk about passive income and making your money generate other money, which is brilliant. The concept of, take a $2,500 down payment or whatever, take some percentage of a down payment and then finance the rest. But what are some other reasons to create passive income in raw land investments?
The only reason to do it is because it's headache free. Otherwise, buy a rental home or buy a self-storage unit or buy a mobile home park or buy anything else that cash flows. But you're going to deal with headaches. Also, the great thing about these inexpensive properties is that you do not have to take a lot of risk. So let's say that we're going to go buy $1 million mobile home park, for example. Well, we've got to put 30% down. We've got to find a bank that's going to loan us $700,000. If we're a first-time operator, they won't do it. So now you've got to partner with somebody. And so it's just simple. Most people can just buy this raw land for cash. The other way, let's say you don't have any cash. Like I had a client, Paul Mandel in New York. Guy only had $500. So he sends out his offers. He gets an accepted offer in upstate New York. And the person's like, oh, I'll sell it for, $3,000. Well, he doesn't have $3,000. So what does Paul do? He's got enough money to mail the neighbors. So he mails out neighbor letters saying, hey, I'm going to buy this property. He tells his original seller, Can I do an option for $50 on your property? It's going to take me 90 days to do due diligence and determine it. So it doesn't take 90 days. It takes a day or two.
Right.
So, he sends out the neighbor letters. The neighbor says, yeah, I want to buy it for $20,000. So he tells the neighbor, okay, send me a check for $20,000. Takes the $20,000, gives the seller his $3,000, then records the deed, said record this one first, record this one second, and he's done.
Wow.
So it is an infinite ROI.
Yeah. That's a good, although sometimes I don't necessarily advise clients to sell stuff before they own it, but you're right. Record the one deed first, record the next deed second.
Right.
Maintain
absolutely.
the chain of title.
He could show the person, hey, I've got control of this.
Right.
On an option.
So you talked about leveraging the systems, the automation to simplify and scale the real estate business. The other thing actually before we get there, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about, you mentioned no tenants, you don't have to worry about fixing toilets. You don't have to worry about good tenants, bad tenants, background checks. You don't have to worry about any of that nonsense. But do you ever run into situations where, like, for example, I can recall there was infamous probably is a better word, an infamous real estate investor down here in the Tampa Bay area. What he would do is he would go buy this raw land from the county. So he'd find a piece of land that was owned by the county. He would buy it for a few dollars, pennies on the dollar, $100, $1,000. I mean, some tiny, tiny amount. But then what he would do is he would do something obnoxious on the property. And then he would contact the surrounding neighbors and say, so for example, on one piece of property, the property line of all it was a property surrounding a pond. And everybody that was on that pond, their property line didn't go all the way to the water. It went almost all the way to the water and stopped. So he bought that little ring of land around the pond. It was, I forget if it belonged to the association or it belonged to the county or whatever. He ended up buying that little ring of land for whatever, $500, $1,000, whatever it was. Then he went to each of the landowners that surrounded that pond and he said, look, unless you pay me 10 grand each, I'm going to erect this huge pink fence and you won't be able to see the pond at all. I'm going to obstruct your view to the pond because I'm going to build this huge, obnoxious 10-foot pink fence on my property, and basically extorted them for 10 grand a piece. Now, I'm sure I didn't get the facts totally straight, but how do you deal with, neighbors that say, that try to underbid you or undercut you, or neighbors that try to do things like, well, I'm going to build a fence, or I'm going to do this obnoxious thing, or I'm going to do that. How do you deal with those guys?
Sean, I'll be honest. I've done over 6,000 transactions now. I've been doing this full time since 2001. I've never heard of such a thing. Now, that being said, I've had people, squat on property. I've had people that we've had to, kick off of property. I've had, trash. Maybe the people put tires out there, but never have I seen extortion on a piece of raw land. And if you watch Yellowstone, I don't advise it. So that's not something you'd ever want to do.
Well, that's
ever.
Good. Well, the epilogue to the story is, unfortunately, this real estate investor guy passed away, so he's not doing it anymore. And he took a lot of bad heat in the press for some of his tactics, and so I think some of the laws were also changed to prevent or prohibit some of that kind of stuff from happening, at least down here in Florida. Yeah,
he's very lucky it made it to the media, and he was shamed out of it instead of buried in the swamp.
Right, and I don't mean to imply that there was any funny business. I think he died of natural causes.
Oh yeah, no, I'm sure. I mean, look, I just read this book called Humankind. We're really a nonviolent, cooperative people. It's like survival of the friendliest. So I'm not saying it's in our nature to do that, but if someone's that obnoxious in raw land, it doesn't go well typically.
Right. So someone's interested in getting started. What would you suggest? What's step number one if somebody wants to do this as a strategy?
So Sean, let's be honest, right? There's 3,007 U.S. counties. Nobody wakes up and thinks themselves, boy, I'd like some raw land in Minnesota today, unless you live in Minnesota.
Right.
So we want to focus on Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, Nevada, Oregon, Washington, California, Florida, right? The sunshine states,
yeah.
Fast-growing states where people in miserable parts of the country would want to, own land one day. So that's where you want to start. Where are the land investors going? Where are good counties to start?
Okay. And one question that occurred to me, does size matter? I mean, are you talking half-acre plots, acre plots, quarter-acre plots, 10-acre plots, or does it really matter?
If you're buying that asset 25, 30 cents on the dollar, there's someone else on the other end of that deal. So I'm opportunistic. Size does not matter. But if I had my choice, I'd always want 40 acres.
40? 40?
40.
Wow.
Yeah, I love 40 acre parcels.
So how big do you happen to know? I don't remember, but in terms of acreage, a 40-acre parcel would be how big from?
Well, 640 acres is a square mile.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could do the math. It's huge.
Right. I mean, it's still 40 acres is still huge, but it's a percentage of a mile.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Is there any, I mean, other than maybe your book and some other materials, and just by doing it, I guess, is how, if someone were interested, they could get started doing something like this?
Yeah. I mean, I think the best way to learn anything is by doing it. So what I would recommend is I've got a free course. If you go to the landgeek.com/quick deals, we teach you how to double your money 30 days or less. And then if the model resonates with you, then you can go deeper into it.
Nice. Okay. Before I get to the end here, anything we didn't talk about, anything I forgot to mention, anything you want to mention?
I mean, always a good question. I'm sure that the listeners are like, well, Mark, if it's so great, why the hell are you talking about this? Aren't you creating your own competition? So it's a good question. And I actually was worried about it when I first started teaching as well. But, my former life was as an investment banker. So as an investment banker, if you're in venture capital, the first thing you ever ask yourself before you do any business is how big is the market? Well, there's billions of acres of land available in the United States, and there's no big money in this niche. There's no hedge funds. There's no private equity groups. You, me, a million people could be in this niche. We'll all run out of money before we run out of deal flow. What's also very interesting is it's really boring. Like, you're not going to go on HGTV where the DIY network can see flip this land.
Right.
The before pictures are all land. The after pictures are all land. So it's this non-competitive niche. It's massive. And for me, it's so gratifying to get people out of what I call subtle economic dependency, which means if they're personally not working, they're not making any money. And so once your passive income exceeds your fixed expenses, and you're working because you want to, not because you have to, I think you can move up Maslow's hierarchy of needs into self-actualization and figure out what you really want to do in life.
Right. That's awesome. I appreciate that. Before I let you go real quick, or before I let the audience go real quick, I do have a second sponsor that I want to talk about, fairly new sponsor to the show, although not new to the show himself, and that's Mark Purvis. He's a videographer with over 23 years in the marketing and advertising industry. He is an Emmy award-winning videographer with over 23 years in the marketing and advertising industry. And what Mark wants you to do is go visit his website, which is legacyspotlight.com. And to sort of bring this back full circle, I talked about my grandfather bringing me out to that piece of dirt. Well, that's what Mark does. So one thing that he'll do is he'll use video and audio to capture some of those stories, some of those family stories, some of those things that you don't want to forget about the older generation, or if you are the older generation, some piece of knowledge, some lesson that you want to pass on to your younger generation, your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids. And so you can contact Mark. Again, it's legacyspotlight.com, and you can talk to Mark about how to create one of those videos to protect and preserve your legacy while you're buying and selling raw land to protect your legacy cash flow. So with that, I think we've pretty much reached the end. Thank you again, Mark. I appreciate you being a guest on the show this week.
Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate it.
And I guess, investing in raw land, one of the things I like to say at the end of every episode is that I hope at the end of the month you have more money rather than at the end of the money you have more month. And certainly investing in raw land seems to be a fantastic way to do that. So thanks again to Mark. Check out his book, Dirt Rich. I'll also put all of his contact information in the notes, but if you want to go to his website, it's thelandgeek.com. And I think that will do it for this week's episode, and we look forward to talking to you in next week's episode of the Crushing Debt podcast.
If you have questions that you think would make a great topic for a future episode, please email Sean or connect with us on social media. Sean Yesner and Yesner Law, PL, are Florida licensed attorneys. The information contained in this week's episode is not a substitute for legal advice. Your situation may differ, especially if you are located somewhere other than the state of Florida. If you have questions, please contact our office or contact a local attorney. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Crushing Debt Podcast.